A second.
Just waiting for the live stream. And we're set to go. Okay, great to see a big room. This is fantastic. So my name is Angela De Fabio. I'm from the Flinders University Institute, and it's our pleasure to welcome you all here today. We're also live streaming, so we have satellite sites in Mount Gambier Limestone Coast, and Barossa York Mid North. So we welcome them online. So I'll start off with a welcome to country. So Flinders University stands on the Kaurna land, and we acknowledge the spiritual, social and cultural practices of the First Nation people, and that includes their amazing art culture. Flinders University actively seeks to drive reconciliation through our business activities, services and programs, and we develop mutually beneficial relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stakeholders. We actively do this through our Reconciliation Action Plan, and we encourage you all to connect with or go to the Flinders University website to have a look at that wrap. And we have an event on the 1st of March that if you'd like to come and join us and help be part of that conversation. Now, in the event of an emergency, we've got the typical whoop whoops, and if you'd just like to listen to the instructions, and then we'd like to get you safely out of the building. Toilets are located on the other side of the elevators, so if you need the toilets, that's where they're located. So, NBI. We like to spark innovation, that's what we do, and we support industries, advanced manufacturing, entrepreneurial education, health, and of course the creative sector. The Department of Innovation and Skills report that the creative sector injects $285 billion into the economy, and that supports over 2,000 jobs, and that's directly and indirectly. So it's a significant industry, and we want to be able to support it. So some of those creative domains are music, film, AR, 3D, and our amazing panel here today, and Dan is going to go through some of those particular industries, but our panelists today are going to provide you with some insights in terms of their careers and how they've been able to maintain and develop a sustainable business, which is where NVI come in. We like to support these businesses through our programs and mentoring and our network, and we encourage, if you're not part of our community, connect with us. We've got amazing space, and I see a couple of Envisioners here. Those Envision spaces are also located in the Limestone Coast and the Barossa York Mid North. So we've got spots everywhere all over the state for you to come and work and be part of our community. So we're delighted to present these amazing speakers, moderated by the amazing Dan Thorsland, who has over 35 years experience as a creative practitioner. We're also lucky to have Dan as part of the Flinders University as a business development manager, as part of the creative arts and humanities and social sciences faculty. We'll have Q&A sessions, so I'll run around with the mic if you have any questions. So without further ado, thank you, Dan.
I probably don't need a mic for the room, but I just want to check.
You do need a mic.
Yeah, is it on? Am I mic'd up?
Can you try with your laptop?
Sorry about that. This is just for the people on the live stream. If you can't hear me.
Oh, no, that's off.
I did a boomer move and didn't turn my lapel mic on. Is that better?
Can you move it closer to your laptop?
Oh, it's no tech check. I'm terrible today. Sorry, folks. Blame it on the heat. Oh dear. Oh dear. Failed my pail. Is that any better?
I think it's okay.
Great.
Unless you put on a t-shirt.
None of the swankiness. All right, folks, thank you. After that quick aborted start, let's get into it. So my name is Dan Thorsland. I've been in South Australia. It'll be 20 years on the 16th of this month, which is pretty scary. And I've worked, for the 20 years that I've worked here in South Australia, I've worked in screen industries almost that entire 2 decades. I've worked at Kojo, I've worked at Rising Sun, I've worked at Mighty Kingdom. I've also worked with a lot of smaller entrepreneurial businesses and small screen production businesses, but overall I've got a pretty good gauge on where the talent pool is in South Australia and how it compares to the rest of the world. So we're very, very fortunate today, and I really appreciate a lot of my friends coming in who represent a group of screen practitioners across the spectrum of screen and games, all of whom are experts in how to build a business from its very foundations, how to work within existing industries, and how to scale that at the top end. And that's really what we want to talk about today. You know, we often speak about how the creative industries must rely on a certain kind of ecosystem of incentives and funds, but in some cases that can actually be a limiter. And we want to have an active discussion about that today in terms of how these folks went about scaling their businesses to where they are. So very quick introductions. We have James Marshall from Trade and Investment, but also in the past was a fantastic virtual reality producer out in Sydney, is that correct? Yep. And we have Phil Mays, who's managing director of Mighty Kingdom, which is the country's largest independently owned, for now, video game company. And I say that because he's in the process of taking his company public, which is an amazing success story for the industry. We have Gina, Helen Ashwell, is that correct? Works for you. I was trying to be formal. I should never do that. And Gina has been a screen producer and a feature film producer for about 20 years, but it also has lots of interesting anecdotes about having to go and source dead kangaroos for short films. There's some great stories, you know, lots of stories. And Bree Whitford-Smith, who has worked, how many years now in industry? Kojo, Axis in the UK, we were just talking about, which is a screen production company there, and is currently at Model Farm. And what's really interesting about Model Farm is that it's a group of screen practitioners who actually used architectural visualization as a way in which to fund their business, and is now going back out to screen production, or never really left. Is that a fair summation? You guys want to fill in any of the gaps there? I do have a mic for that. So what I'd like to open up with the group, if the audience is kind enough, and the group has no choice because they agreed to come here, is I'd like to get a quick overview from anyone on the panel as to their earliest days as a creative practitioner. And the reason I want to point that out, and if you could flick across to that chart. Ah, is that what I look like? So this, and we've got a couple people, a couple folks here from Minister Pisoni's team, the Department of Innovation and Skills. There's a growth state plan that was released in November of last year by the Marshall government, which was in response to the Joyce report that said of the 9 sectors that will grow the state economy, the creative industry is definitely one of them. And what this chart is looking at is what is the average growth in terms of GVA, or gross value add, how much money comes into the state from the sectors of creative industry. And as you can see, screen, music and the performing arts, and independent creatives is all well above the state average for industry growth. And that's from 2019 back. I would say we're probably at the precipice of a much higher level of growth. I think the folks in state government would be happy to hear that, because they'd like to see this sector grow by 5% the next 10 years. And that's part of what I want to talk about in the panel today, is how do you as an independent creative access that growth, and then how do you leverage that into doing a studio build. Stop. So first question for the panel, and I did send you a question, so I wasn't thinking about it. What's your experience, pick one to go first, going from startup to about mid-tier, when you first got that first stable production in? I always call it the hiring employee number 1.
I can go first.
Yep. Make sure it's on.
We good? Everyone here? Great. So I'll just quickly talk about how I started in the business. So I was at school, and in England you do college between university, or you can do another sixth form thing that they do. And I went to college and I did video production, because I kind of knew pretty early on that's what I wanted to do. And I was in my first year, and the guy that ran it was a ex-BBC camera guy. And I said to him, how do I get into this business? Like, it's really competitive. You know, I just can't see myself breaking in. Lots of people are going to uni to do film, but it was too expensive. It's not going to be an option for me. So he said, I would knock on every door, write letters to everybody, and just see how you go. So I took his advice, and that's exactly what I did. I tromped around Soho in London for a week or so, banging on doors, giving my CV, which had nothing on it because I was at school. Apart from the odd restaurant job, that was about it. But I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I put my CV into Pinewood Studios, which is, of course, then especially the most iconic film studios in the UK. So I put my CV in. which by whatever happened, I don't know, it got to a guy called Steve Gunn, who was setting up Pinewood Television at the time. So they were setting up a television department of Pinewood. And his PM rang me and said, you know, we can't give you a runner's job, which is the bottom of the rung, but we can give you an usher job, which was the worst job ever, because your job was to usher studio audiences round Pinewood in the middle of the winter and make sure that they didn't run away or go to the Bond stage or do something that they shouldn't. And it was horrible hours, horrible pay. And I went, sure, sounds great. Why not? How hard could it be? Well, it was. And then I did that through the summer of my first year at college, on the summer break. And at the end of the summer break, when it was time to go back to college, I went and saw Steve and he said, you've done really, really well. I'm going to give you a job as a runner. So upgrade now. Now you're going to make tea, but you'll be inside. So this is like a step up. And I said, oh, okay, good. Oh, okay. So I went to my tutor and I said to him, do I stay at college or do I take this job of making tea at Pinewood? And he said, take the job. And that changed my life. So, that experience was what I still stand by. Good people around you, good advice, take the risk and be up for it kind of thing. And then I sort of progressed from making tea, which was good. Because running around making tea that's fine.
But you never make tea again? Did you hire somebody to make tea?
No, I still make my own tea. That's fine. It's good. So from that experience at Pinewood, it was a very intensive life experience. We were shooting 3 shows a day. You're working 15, 16 hours a day. That was the expectation. They kind of wanted to see if you had the stamina, I think. I don't know, but it was in really intense at that time. So it gave me a really good work ethic. I got to be around great people. And then they said, okay, how about you do this job? And I said, no, I'm going to go and make my own stuff now. And they went, okay. This was a 20-year-old, extremely, I can do anything at that point. Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to London now, I'm going to go and do my own thing, went off. And that's how I started running my own business, because I actually didn't have a choice. If I was going to make my own stuff, that's what I had to do and I had to learn. And I made lots of mistakes and learned lots, but it was a very quick kind of, and put my hand up stuff. So I'm not sure entirely how to do this, but I'm pretty sure I'll do my best and figure it out. And that's how literally I started having my own businesses and employee one. Mm. And growing from then was building on success really. Cool. And delivering.
So are you allowed to talk about what you have in production currently?
No.
Okay. It's pretty cool, that's all I can say. But how many feature films have you had producer credit on to date now?
So 2 in England. Yeah. I produced a film when I was very, very young, and not that makes any difference to be honest, but it was a massive learning curve. And I said, okay, to progress from this up, I'm going to need a lot of learning and a lot of skills development, lots of script development, all of those things, and kind of had a timeline in my head that I wouldn't make another one for this period. I did, but then went, okay. And then I worked very, very hard for very long. I had, I promise. Went on holiday and met my husband, who's from Adelaide. So we decided to live in, immigrate here. I thought this will be fun. This is different. I've done a lot in London and America and stuff. And thus landed here and was very fortunate to meet my now business partner, Helen, who obviously has an amazing career in Australia and very successful, really experienced, and thought, oh, well, luck's in here.
And former CEO of the SA Film
She's former chair of what was Screen Australia before, on the board of what was Screen Australia before. So again, being around good people, learning as much as you can, I kind of felt I'd lucked in really. So that was good.
Cool. Thanks, Gina. So the thing that I'm teasing out there is that, and you'll hear this commonly across a lot of people in creative industries, and I've worked with tens of thousands over the years, those first opportunities are always about your knowledge of the industry that you're going into. When you first meet that person who's going to give you opportunity, they will be able to tell, because they're in the industry, whether or not you got the chops. And you have to know your material. You have to know your medium. And from there, it's a lot of hard work. It's always a lot of hard work. Phil?
Yeah, I can concur. There's no pathway that doesn't involve a lot of hard work. But I'll give you a bit of a background of how I got into the industry, because that was also why a lot of the reasons why I started Mighty Kingdom. So I'm originally from New Zealand. You'll hear me mention that a lot. It's a lovely place. You should all visit once we're allowed. But I grew up in a dairy farming community, a very small town in the far north of New Zealand. And I was actually originally doing arts when I was at school and switched to computer science when I went to university. I actually dropped out of university and took a job as an IT call center and went up the ranks and was building a career in IT, relatively successfully when an opportunity came to study game development. And I was a latecomer to game development. I didn't think it was a career opportunity within New Zealand. I sort of mucked around on my Commodore 64 back in the days. But when this opportunity came, I wrote an application to the course. It was a postgraduate, so I had to explain how my experience in industry was equivalent to having a degree. But I got an interview and I got into the course. And that was really the catalyst for my career. It's interesting you point out the connections that you make are really what gets you that foot in the door. And we had a couple of lecturers that were working at media design school in New Zealand that were ex-executives from large gaming companies over in the US. And one of my friends on the course said, these guys aren't going to stay here. They're really smart. They're going to get picked up and go back to industry. So let's get to know them, let them get to know us. And so we took one of them out tramping around New Zealand and taught him how to play cricket and a whole bunch of things. For an American, that was very interesting.
Tell me about it.
And he was not very good. But it was, it sort of panned out. He ended up getting picked up by a company called Midway. They bought a studio in Adelaide called Ratbag. And then he reached out to me and said, look, would you like to apply for a job here? And that's how I got my start. As Dan probably knows, we were sliding doors. We missed each other at Ratbag.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
His now boss, who got him hired, was my executive producer on a game I was producing at Ratbag.
Funnily enough, the reason Dan left Ratbag was the reason I got hired, the same person.
I don't like working for him.
But and that was definitely being thrown in the deep end. So I was a junior programmer, fresh in Adelaide. I'd been there less than 2 weeks and I was doing 15-hour days, 16-hour days. It was right into crunch. And after being in a very well-structured and corporate environment to going into the exact opposite in game dev, I was like, wow, this is crazy, this is fun. And then it all fell apart. 2 months later, the company was shut down. My stuff was still on the boat from New Zealand, so I was sitting watching TV on a microwave box and eating food off my lap. I was very fortunate to land at a company called Chrome, who were based in Brisbane but started a studio in Adelaide to capture all this talent that they couldn't leave for a number of reasons. A lot of people have better reasons, and my stuff hasn't got here yet, but my reason was good enough. And so I started there as one of the first programmers and stayed there for a number of years, 4 or 5 years. And we lured him back in, as the industry is wont to do.
Yeah, Phil and I worked on a couple little things called Star Wars.
Yes.
Might have heard of that property? A couple Star Wars games.
It was fantastic to get exposure to some of those big brands and to suddenly see how accessible they are. Like, we're a little studio here in Adelaide and we're working on what is still one of the marquee IP in the entire world. And that was really exciting. Worked on a bunch of stuff that never got released, Spyro, and
Happy Feet too.
yeah, like a whole bunch of things. But I saw the opportunities that mobile brought at that stage, 2010, and that's when I left to form Mighty Kingdom. And funnily enough, not long after I left, Chrome shut down, and then within the following 2 years, pretty much every major game studio closed down around Australia. My journey with Mighty Kingdom, I co-founded it with another person, and the way we did it is we didn't start it until we had a client, so we had revenue day one, and so we hired someone day one, Andrew Macross, who's now the CTO of HappyCo. So we sort of came out the gate running, but 2012-13 we split the business. Jindo, my co-founder, took HappyCo, went to the US, and was having a lot of success. And I looked at the industry, the game industry at that moment, and thought, this is terrible. Like, the industry that I walked into in 2005 had like opportunity at every level, and the industry as it was in 2012 was nothing.
And I think the important stake in the ground then was the GFC
Oh, yes.
hit. And the GFC is what wiped out. So the studio Phil and I were working at had 400 employees across the country in 3 different studios, but it was all funded by America. It's all funded by big US national companies. And as soon as the dollar went above parity and we were no longer a cheap labor market, what happened in 12 months?
Everything left. Yeah, and I could see it happening, and I knew that fundamentally all the skill level, the talent, everything was still there, and so it was just about creating an opportunity for them to show how good they were. So from an early stage, I was like, okay, if we're going to run the games industry, let's stand out, let's grow a big company, be a lightning rod for talent, for opportunity, and show what can be done here. I was sort of committed to rebuilding what I had when I came here and making sure that there were pathways for others as well. And I talk a lot about it, and I really challenge other people to do it, but also, you can't just ask everyone else to do your work. So, it's been a conscious goal of mine is to get that scale back. And, so we're at that point here now. Hiring Dan was one of my catalysts. You talk about those key hires that you make. I knew I needed to move to a different tier of client. Bringing Dan on board was an opportunity to start attracting those. And that's how we ended up working with Disney, with Moose Toys, and a number of other clients. It's been fantastic journey of ups and downs. I think any business that runs for 10 years has got a lot of stories to tell.
And any creative industry person that works for 10 years has got a lot of ups and downs. It's part of the course.
But yeah, look, it's been a fantastic journey, and as Dan pointed out at the start, we're at a really interesting phase of that journey for us, where we're looking to take the company public, which will allow us to grow even larger. We're currently around 90 people at Mighty Kingdom. Started with 2, so that's. I look at that change that we made in 2012-13 really being that pivot point in the business where we really honed in and figured out who we were and what we do.
Well, you had an offer to go to Silicon Valley.
Oh yeah, don't we all?
The hotbed of activity in 2013, the early days of the growth of the mobile industry. You had a pretty big offer, and I know you were wrestling with it. And tell the audience a little bit about that. I'm still working the inside line here.
No, it's good. And like for me, it was an interesting point. So I just had my son. So he was sort of 7, 8 months old at that point. So my first experience of visiting the US was going to San Francisco with my son and my wife, and going to a little Airbnb, which was that was new. It was the hot new thing, and trying to figure out how to get the TV to work. And then the first thing we saw was a mass shooting in Oakland. And then my question was like, "Where's Oakland? Is it close?" So America, I was like, I don't know if I'm that keen on being here long term. So, when the opportunity came to work in San Francisco, I had to weigh that up versus, what is it? It was a good moment to go, what do I actually value? What do I want in life? And where do I want to be? And I could see the pathway and I could see all the struggle and the difficulties that would bring. Not to say that being in Adelaide didn't have its own struggles and difficulties, but I much preferred that challenge and that environment. And I think it's very easy to be living in Adelaide. And look, I come from a very small town, so we have that big city, dreams where you think one day I'm going to get out of here and I'll make it in the world. But you can make it here and you can do it here. There's been no limitations on our success from being here in Adelaide. And so, having that realization made me think, well, there's a lot of lovely things in Adelaide. My wife's from Adelaide, that's a good start. My stuff had arrived by then, so I had my TV on.
In 2013?
Yeah, it was pretty good. I had a slightly nicer TV. But yeah, so it was a real shift. A shift in focus for me personally and what I wanted. And as you know, Dan, I re-architected the business at that point as well to be more about people. I knew that as a creative industry, it is you want your creative people to be as creative as possible, and it's about creating an environment where you're trying to remove as many of the other stresses that they have and allowing them to bring that creativity to the fore. So I focus a lot on that, and it's an area that we're constantly looking to improve in, because I think that's what one of our competitive advantages are. Anyway, I've talked for ages. I should probably.
No, it's good, and it's a really good segue. I'd love to talk a little bit about Paletta. Do your bit, and I am going to do your cheer squad bit, right? Because you know how to do that.
Okay. I'll just follow on and tell my story. Is that okay? I started at Flinders, and first job was at Kojo. I got a lot of my jobs from parties, to be honest. I crashed to 21st, and she happened to work in the machine room at Kojo and needed an assistant. So I got that job, and actually I got that job, and then I turned it down because I booked a trip to South America after uni, and I wasn't giving that up. So I went, and then by the time I got back, they hadn't found anyone else. So
Destiny.
And then from there, I went to another party and got a job with Channel 9 in Melbourne. So I moved to Melbourne, and yeah, so I did a bit of post, bit of TV. Then the industry kind of dried out. So I went to Alice Springs and became a tour guide because I think everyone needs a backup plan. There are so many ups and downs in this industry. You need like some sort of trade to go to just to stay afloat. Yeah, so I did that and then got a job on Mary and Max, which was a stop motion animation, and that was through a contact at Kojo. Again, I think making friends with the right people and just being, I think, genuine. And then from there, I moved to the UK and did the working holiday visa thing and did more tour guiding because I just wanted to party. And yeah, that was a bit more flexible. Anyway, I met my husband and ended up staying in Edinburgh. And we had to come back and then go back on a fiance visa. We got married really quick. So I could stay. but during that time, I came back and worked on Happy Feet 2, and that was my first job in CGI, and I fell in love with it. I really, really enjoyed the technical way of thinking creatively, if anyone understands that. But yeah, I fell in love with the technical side of it. And, you know, the first time I saw a point cloud blew my mind. And the fact that you can move the camera around and the whole environment it exists. It's not just what you see. So yeah, and I made a lot of friends on Happy Feet 2. I think everyone in the industry worked on Happy Feet 2 at some point. So yeah, a lot of contacts there and a lot of global contacts there. Went back to Glasgow, got married, and started working at Axis Animation, who do cinematics for games, like big games like Halo and heaps of others.
Big console, Call of Duties.
Yeah. So yeah, the first gig was Halo 4, an hour of real cinematics. It was massive, and I worked in the layout, editorial, and animation department. Never done that before, but you know, jumped in, and that was working with motion capture coming from LA. So that was a huge learning curve, but that's what you do. You just jump in to the deep end, and yeah, really loved the way you build a story and a shot production and an animation, especially I really enjoyed motion capture where there was so much flexibility to see the action, move the camera around and really create your shots that way. And then from there, sort of more Guild Wars 2 and Good Game Empire, Grey Goo, heaps of games. And because it was
Who's over there as a gamer going, oh my God.
I know those cinematics.
And yeah, and more Halo trailers. But yeah, it was great because the IP was there. Some of them we created new IP, very limited, but that was more when the studio moved into advertising, and then eventually got to work on some BBC shows as they opened up into VFX. So got to work on a Doctor Who episode. That was pretty cool. Yeah, so I was there for 8 years, and that, you know, I learned so much there. And I started when they were small in, honestly, a building that was falling down. Like the ceiling would regularly just come lower and lower. So yeah, I think it's really useful to start at a company that's already starting to see how they've grown and learn from their mistakes and just really watch where they pivot and you know, because you know they went through some recessions and had to change tactic then, and they're massive now. Anyway, came back to Kojo, came back to Adelaide, had kids, that's what you do. Came back to Kojo and now at Model Farm. So Shane, who worked at Rising Sun Pictures, anyone who's worked in visual effects knows that it's pretty intense. And then when you start having younger kids, it gets, really bad. So the hours are really not sustainable for children. So Shane broke out of RSP to do architectural visualization because it was an industry you could use his skills that needed high quality renders, and he was giving the industry something that they hadn't seen in Adelaide before, which was like super photoreal, not sort of what you've seen in the past. Architectural visualization is a whole different ballgame these days. So I was probably one of Shane's first hires, in Model Farm, because we always had the plan on learning sort of where we can build our team in architecture visualization and using different techniques that hadn't been used in film before, because film is such a rigid pipeline. Whereas with architecture visualization, we can play around with different programs. We started using Twinmotion and Unreal Engine, and seeing where we can push the real-time stuff. And that's kind of Shane's game plan. If we can really nail real-time in architecture visualization where it's currently being used, then we can move over into entertainment, into a realm that, you know, we both missed, even though we didn't like the hours.
Can I talk a little bit about rendering in real time for the audience?
Yes.
Just quickly and hand back?
Yeah.
So rendering in visual effects is where you set up a computer graphics shot for, say, a Harry Potter film or a big Marvel movie, and you send it off to a render farm that can have thousands of computer cores in it. And it may take up to 40 hours per single image, per single frame of that film to do all the computation and render out that image. So when we talk about real time, switching back to video games, when you're playing a video game, those images are being rendered at anywhere between 30 and 60 seconds, at 30 and 60 frames per second. So you think about, 40 hours per frame compared to, hundreds of frames in every second in a video game. That's the technique that Bree's referring to. The difference is quality. So what you get out of a render farm for a VFX film is photorealistic, and has simulated light and fur. In video games, it all has to be simplified so that that mobile phone that you're holding can actually create those images. So I hope that makes sense to people who aren't technical in the audience. And sorry to steal your thunder back.
Nice, that's good. I sometimes glaze over that and just everyone knows what real time is, right? So yeah, through that kind of started to nail photorealism in real time. And as a side project, I started my own business. I sold an IP for a children's TV series that's in development now. But I wrote that to use real-time rendering and virtual production because, I think if you're going to start a business, you need to write yourself into it so that no one else could do it but you. At least that's what everyone else thinks. So by writing this IP and writing myself into it where other producers don't know what I'm talking about, it's always you can own a meeting if you've got the upper hand. So that was very handy. And yeah, so yeah, two big production companies have picked it up out of Sydney. And yeah, so as well as, in development takes ages. So as well as doing that with Model Farm, because we've nailed real-time photoreal and just looking good in stylistic as well, Epic Games is sending sort of people our way nationally who want to do the same thing and start using Unreal. So we've had studios approach us and ask if we can train them up to move their pipelines. We've had a couple of IPs come to us as well. So one of them is Luke Juravish's next series for the ABC. So we did a proof of concept out at the Void. So this one was looking at motion capture with a live sort of feedback session in Unreal, so that if you're in the suit, you can see your character moving. So the problem with motion capture most times is when you retarget to the rig, you'll get sort of some funky things. Also, characters are not usually the same shape as humans in stylistic things, or when you're doing monsters and things like that. So if you can see that your head's bigger, and when you do this, your hand's cutting through your head, then you can fix all of those animations live when you're doing the capture, so that once you've got all your data back, your animators aren't fixing cut-throughs. That's usually what animation post-mocap is.
Referred to unceremoniously as cleanup.
Cleanup, yeah. So that was amazing because, Luke could choreograph with the actors in the suits and see the results instantly and change his direction. It was more like directing live action rather than animation. And also directing multiple characters at once, whereas that's quite hard to do when you're directing, hand animated stuff. So yeah, and then we're in discussions with another kids series that's going for an Epic grant to do another proof of concept. This one using volumetric capture, which is when you capture an action of a live action person, but you capture that in a 3D way so that it comes in as a 3D asset that moves. So while we've been capturing people in 3D and then putting a rig on them and animating them, this way the animation's done, it looks realistic. You've got simulation of cloth that you don't have to worry about, hair, and it gets all of that at once. And then it's a 3D model so that when you put it in the scene, you light it with the rest of your environment and it actually sits in there. So I think volumetric capture will be a huge game changer. And hopefully this grant comes through and we can see how we can use it to save money on digi-doubles and things like that. But yeah, so that's, I think that's it. Sorry.
That's fantastic. No, and you know, that's one of the things before we pass over to James that I was kind of again teasing out of this person is that Bree, when she brought that Paletta group in, she had an animation director who'd never worked in motion capture. And motion capture in simple terms is, has anyone seen the movie Avatar with the big blue aliens? Not the one with the bald kid, right? I think most people have seen that. They didn't actually put giant blue alien suits on the actors. Those were computer generated figures that the actors' movements were translated through using a process of sophisticated puppetry called motion capture. And Bree, you can hear her just rattling off all of these terms as a producer, really conversant in this technology. So when they came down to Flinders, where we have a production stage that has a motion capture system, has a whole bunch of other sophisticated technology, Ken Magnus is here. He can answer a lot more questions than I can, as can Jason, who are lecturers and technicians that run that studio. She had a team that knew how to resolve a set of complex technical problems to create a creative outcome that I don't think anyone I've ever seen do. Like it was, you had somebody from ILM, wasn't Rangi ex-ILM? Yeah. Industrial Light Magic, the first visual effects company in the world. It was founded by George Lucas to make the first Star Wars film. Oh yeah, had one of those, you know. And so she had this team and she understood the problems they had to solve, and in there, and Cam was witness to it, we're able to resolve a lot of that problems to the satisfaction, not only of her director, but also of the 3 dance students and the 2 theater actors who had never worked in that kind of production before. By about day 4, got about 3 minutes in the can. That's remarkable. And that's an example of true pivoting when, as a practitioner, you realize that you have a transferable skill in terms of working with sophisticated and complex technologies, putting a crew together, and then to use it in a different commercial sense. So I just wanted to put that pin in the map there for that. And it also segues greatly into what James does. So James is probably the one person at the table that's done virtual reality development. So
yep. Well, assuming. But yeah, so my career path is best described as weird and convoluted. But that's always worked out well for me. So I started in film and TV. I started trying not to study film and TV because Tarantino didn't go to film school, so why the hell should I? And that didn't work because the first question anyone that has control of France asks you is, what film school did you go to? So I went to film school, and while I was there, I was very interested both in production work, and I was very aggressive at trying to find commercial clients and do commercial projects and volunteer on other people's, people who graduated on their projects. And so my first paid job was in lighting department on this indie feature on the Gold Coast, which is just horrible. It was a really bad film.
Please name it. Come on.
A crooked business, but it was aptly named. There was all sorts of stuff going on. Anyway, I got paid, which was great. And that was while I was still at uni. So after uni, I had a fairly decent show reel because I'd done music videos and stuff like that. Almost been kicked out of film school a couple of times. I put my show reel together because I'd worked on the feature. I knew world-class crew who were also mortified to have been on that shoot and were very happy to give me reference letters. So I got into Australian Film Television Radio School, which is in Sydney. So we moved from Brisbane to Sydney, and I did a year at Afters, during which I pursued the more interactive. I wanted to do social media. I wanted to do things that were outside of traditional film and TV, which again just made me weird. And most of my classmates didn't really know what I was doing. The school didn't really know what I was doing half the time. But Yahoo 7 found what I was doing interesting, and so they offered me a job. They didn't really know what to do with me, so they asked me to come on as a producer for their online component. So we helped Yahoo TV, or what was +7, I can't remember what it used to be called, but their catch-up TV service, we helped that get up and running. While I was there, I got to help build their content management system, and I worked on stuff like X Factor for the first 4 years, and Sunrise and Morning Show and Home and Away and the glory days. I even worked on Doctor Who. I spent 3 months putting ad breaks into Doctor Who. All complaints, please email d.thorsland@. I did that. They were a client, so I was working freelance for them, but I was there between 20 and 80 hours a week. Initially, it was more like 80, and towards the end, it was more like 10 to 20. For about 6 or 7 years. At the same time, I was working on side projects. I worked on an early stage AI-based media property that had me potentially moving to the US. And again, it was like Albuquerque, and the only thing I knew about Albuquerque was Breaking Bad. So it wasn't particular. I just had a kid, and it really wasn't interested.
So you weren't into meth cooking?
No.
Okay.
It's a growth industry. But yeah, because I knew, because I worked with patent lawyers, they introduced me to this other guy who wanted to start a games company, and we went into business together doing mobile games content for professional sport, which, if anyone knows me, is really not my forte. But he was a former professional rugby player, so he knew everybody. And that allowed us to we were exclusive children's content provider to the NRL. We did an anti-bullying thing for the Sharks that got released, and because we had Sharks players in the game, it gave us immediate market cut through. So we broke into, like the top 5 in the iTunes charts, which was great. It didn't make us any money. And my business partner, I didn't see eye to eye on a bunch of things. I eventually sold my share of the business to him, and then moved across into virtual reality production, which had just become a thing that existed, whereas previously it had been more of a pipe dream. But I went with a company called Start VR. I came on fairly early stage with them as a senior producer. They were looking for someone who had a weird combination of skills, who understood both film and TV production on set, in post, through distribution, and who also understood software development and game design. And I think I was like the only guy in Sydney. So when they asked me, how much do you charge? I was like, this much. And they just said, okay. And I was like, holy crap. I really should have doubled that. But that was really good. I came on with them. I worked there for about 3 years, initially as a freelance, then later as part of the full-time team. We worked on, Qantas VR, a whole bunch of relatively mundane corporate VR stuff. But we also did room scale, and we also did volumetric capture. So we had to fly. We had a big project. We shot in LA using some of the talent that we partnered with UTA. We had assets built at Animal Logic, and then we shot at Microsoft's only volumetric stage at the time in Seattle at their headquarters. And then we did post and all the dev work back in Sydney. And yeah, we had partners like HTC and NVIDIA and Screen Australia, and it's just mind-blowing how big the thing sort of got. It was exhausting and it was awesome, but more importantly, my wife and I decided at that point we didn't want to really live in Sydney anymore. So we were looking around for other things to do. Just as Awake was finishing, and Awake went on to do, it premiered at South by Southwest and went on to Cannes. Got nominated for a bunch of awards, not that it ever won anything. Favourite Immortal kept winning. Stupid Star Wars. But yeah, we decided to move to Adelaide just because of the arts culture and the approach to lifestyle, and it just seemed like a really high potential spot. And literally the next morning after deciding to move to Adelaide, Technicolor announced they're opening a visual effects studio. So I jumped on the phone to the global managing director of Mill Film and said, "Can I have a job, please?" And just like Yahoo before her said, "I don't know what to do with you. Would you be interested in running Technicolor Academy?" Which sounded like fun. So I came in with them as, I think, employee number 4 in the state, and we grew to 400 and something in the first 12 months. I put 60 something juniors through the studio floor myself with a small team that we put together, and that was fun. But at sort of the end of the 12-month mark, they didn't really need someone to start. Like, I was good at starting up the studio. They wanted someone, probably less expensive to be honest, to keep it going. And there were options to go into projects like cats. So instead, I started to work for state government. Yeah, state government sort of were interested in me. And that was another, that's weird, but all right, I'll have a look at that. But that's sort of where I am now with trade and investment, where we're tasked with helping the state export and bring money in for the creative industries. Looking at that chart up there, I find it really interesting because these things are often not measured accurately. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics, until middle of last year, didn't even measure most game development work. Like it just wasn't a thing that they measured. They don't measure volumetric. They won't measure a lot of stuff in VFX. Like the terms and the technology are moving way faster than the bureaucrats and the ABS are working. So yeah, but even with that in mind, the screen sector is growing quickly. There's only really 2 people in the creative industries team in trade investments, myself and Claudia. So we're primarily focused on the screen sector. We focus on VFX and video games. Because there is an opportunity there, you can immediately get into world-class work. You could be working on Halo. You could be working on partnerships with Disney. You can really move quickly. Video games have no barrier to the marketplace. Once you understand niche marketing, the theories are your barrier, but there's no cost to hardware or anything like that. It's just a little bit of time, effort, grit. Good luck. But those things are of interest, so that's really where we're focused now. And then on the side, I've also started my own games company called Golden Age, working with Ance Robinson and a small team. And we're working on a game with a sort of technology offshoot to that. But we're bootstrap stage at that, so I'm not quite at the stage of hiring anybody, so keep your resumes on the whole. Although that said, as a business development manager for creative industries, if anyone wants career advice, if you're looking at getting into this sector and you'd like someone to talk to who's worked in any of the screen sectors, then please reach out. My contact details, I assume, are on the invitation.
It should be.
Yeah.
If not, we'll make sure
We can
get
make
them
them
right there.
available.
Yeah, well, it's just james.marshall@sa.gov.au. So, or hit me up after this. And I forgot my business cards, but I'll tell it to you again.
And that is a phenomenal segue because we're starting to run short on time. But as you can tell from the group of people that we have here, and I haven't even crapped down about my 35 years in the industry. I got lots of stories. But the point is that these people are here operating in South Australia. We have an opportunity now for you folks to ask them, how do you go about getting that first opportunity? Or if you're at a mid-tier, how to go about financing that? So I'd like to open the floor for questions, and there might be some online questions that Charlotte has as well. Yeah, maybe you guys okay to share this? I share it this month.
Does anyone want to?
But if you're offering,
Does anyone want to start with a question?
don't be shy.
Online, Charlotte?
Aaron House, talking about the Mandalorian.
Of course he is. Yeah, I'm happy to, if Aaron's curious about the Mandalorian and what we do. Like that's Aaron being kind as a person who works in state government now, but used to work for NBI. We do have the virtual production techniques that were used for Disney's TV show called The Mandalorian, which is accessible to producers such as Bree. And it's right over at Bedford Park in the Void. And we are looking at getting a new set of panels in as early as next month so we can do more workshops up on board industry around that. So people who are screen producers want to work with innovative technology, as Bree talked about, we definitely have that resource available for you. Talk about the money. Ask them about how to get the money. That's the key thing. How do you get the money?
About money.
Any other questions? I'll answer it if I get a finance question. No questions from the room? Oh, Emma, how are you?
I was just wondering, so it's particularly James, because it sounds like a lot of people approach you because you work a bit differently, but also Adelaide sometimes doesn't like the difference. And so I was just wondering how maybe also the others but yourself found like moving up and getting approached when Adelaide keeps things a lot behind the scenes. So you have to come to a lot of these events and find out who's who and then really sort of, put the hard slog in. So I was just wondering how else you could sort of go through that. and actually sort of break the barriers when you are something that's a bit different, because people don't know where to put you, and that freaks them out.
Yeah, you have to just kind of ignore it. So when I was doing undergrad, and I was like, MySpace had just come out, and I was really into that, and it stopped working. But I was busy setting up fake profiles for characters and stuff back before that became a no-no. And then the same thing when I was at Afters, I set up a whole bunch of fake characters and had this game that was partly online, partly videos. I shot on an iPhone, which the film school, like anyone that didn't want to shoot on 35mm was a freak. I was like, no, just shoot it on the phone. And I recorded stuff onto like old VHS tapes to give me a texture that saved me probably 4 days of post. But I like that sort of guerrilla approach. And yeah, everybody else there, they weren't all prima donnas, but there were definitely a couple of them. And it was very much like, oh yes, James is doing his thing. I don't care anymore. I did at times, but I'm beyond it now. I think when I started charging 6 figures, I stopped worrying about it.
Wow, there's an end point. I started charging 6 figures and I stopped worrying. But I think a little bit of advice I'll put in there, because I've worked with them twice across the years. Once is my boss, actually. Fantastic. Hire her. When you don't fit a small community like this that has relatively small set of studios, like I think it's over 95% of the companies in South Australia, less than 20 employees, doing what James just hinted at, but he does it innately. What is the thing that you can do for them that they need to sort their business out, to make them some money? So when you're looking at somebody to collaborate with as an independent creative professional, you have to really go into that strategy to go, here's how I can help you add value to your business. And believe me, that's what you do from a client standpoint. Phil would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that when you're small, like weird is good, because you don't know what you're going to need. And having people who've got very diverse skill sets, who just put their hand up and say, I reckon I can fix that, that's like actually an advantage. And so I think it does come back to building those relationships, getting to know people, and just being open and honest about the weird things that you're into. And then an opportunity will come along and they'll be like, hey, I talked to somebody who looks in this space or operates here, and that can be your foot in the door. So it's kind of like a combination of embracing the weird, obviously having a skill set, having that depth there, so that when you do get the opportunity, you can prove yourself and double down on it. But definitely get out there, put yourself out there, get to know people. I think I had an advantage because I wasn't from Adelaide. So when people say, what school did you go to? I'm like, Kaitaia Primary. Like what do they know? Like it doesn't, so I was able to sort of like skip past all of that stuff. But don't feel bound by it. Like I think that just, I always think when it comes to risk, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you can always go back to being boring, but why not try weird for a bit, see where it gets you?
We had a question from the online stream, a bit more of a practical sourcing question. To complement the digital media and various formats, e.g. games and CGI, where do the artists and practitioners source their voiceover actors for their work? Is there a collective establishment of voice actors that solely focus on working with and delivering to the creative community?
Well, if you guys don't answer that, I sure will. Would you like to answer?
No, I was just going to say we source from agents generally.
Yeah.
Like, so agents will have a pool. There's specific agents for voiceovers.
Yeah, and when I did a Dukes of Hazzard game, we obviously had to get a whole bunch of people, because I worked on that. We had to get a whole bunch of people in LA because some of the actors had actually passed away, including the guy who played Boss Hogg, because I know you all know about Dukes of Hazzard. But a lot of the voice actor work, depending on the region you're going into, you often have to call up a casting agency who can get that kind of accent for you. That said, I would say there is absolutely an opportunity domestically here in South Australia to start working on specific performance techniques for a lot of the CG environments that folks are crossing over into, because we basically trained in 5 days, or at least gave a good CV piece to 5 actors who had never worked in motion capture, who now understand the issues that you were talking about of how to move that character you see on the screen robotically. The same thing would be the case with voice. I find that theatrical training in voice is often far more useful, and I found this from, I think it was Crispin Hands, because I wrote a bunch of dialogue, huge name drop here. I wrote a bunch of dialogue for an unpublished Batman video game. I had to do 1,200 lines of dialogue for all the characters walking around Gotham City, and the voice actors that they used were almost always theater and not screen because they knew how to inflect and communicate character in very few lines. So I think there's some, to whoever that person is, it's a very insightful question. Do we make a resource like that in South Australia? Obviously, these people can tell you whether or not you should do that. I hope that answers that question.
To add one thing, in motion capture, you do the action and the voice most times. So, because it's cheaper, you know. Although in Halo, we did redo the voice of Palmer because it was really nasally in the people's ears when they were playing. So they completely redid her voice after the animation.
Yeah, what's interesting about motion capture is that you're not capturing the likeness of the actor, so you can stick a mic on. It doesn't matter because the camera doesn't see it.
I can carry on the finance conversation.
for
if we've got time.
Yeah,
I won't be
have we
too
got
long.
time?
Yeah, the last question.
So our company focuses on IP development. So we're not a service company. So people don't come into South Australia, hire us to run their production. We actually are totally focused on IP creation. That's why we don't make volume, because we have a catalogue too that we can, when the rights come back, we can resell. We have black and white at the moment with Robert Carlyle that we launched at the film festival, which had been remastered. And we consciously took that choice when we started the business, that we weren't going to make something until we had that big slate behind us and that everything was ready. Because people can fall into the trap of producing something because they're desperate to get, cash flow in. And I understand that, but we kept small, had a plan, and that's what we were going to do. And the thing with film is every single one's a startup. So what we do is we come up with the idea, we commission the writers, we then raise the money, we then manufacture the film, and then we sell the film. So we're at every single stage. It takes ages. Average script development, 3 to 6 years from start to finish. So I worked in the US, I've worked in London. In the US, I was mentored by Cassian Elways, who's one of the biggest independent producers in the world, having done Dallas Buyers Club, Lawless, etc. And I thought, I'm going to learn I'm going to know everything now. Like, that's it, I'm going to learn all these tricks. And the trick is great material. Having access to world-class material. If you can produce world-class material, they'll come. It's as simple as that. But we would get in a week, especially at Pinewood, 2,000 scripts a week. No joke. It was unbelievable. And that's because people were trying, to get the opportunity. Does anyone want to hazard a guess how many have been sent here in 5 years?
60,000.
Under 10.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's about putting yourself out there. And okay, 11 now. 11. So, and when we're raising money for that project, there's so many things that you have to look at. And you're talking about alternative sources of finance. You look at everything because you just got to, make it happen, really. But you also have to look at the commercial aspect, which is really important and close to my heart, which is you actually need an audience that wants to pay for that product. Because I say this in the office, I'll probably get told off. I can't eat awards, unfortunately. I actually need money to buy food. So it's really important. Also, our job, as much as we've made it all sound quite hard, because it is like, it's really long hours, it's really painful. You don't have a life a lot of the time, and you're on all the time. And I've worked for big corporations too, doing project managing for gas, oil, pharmaceutical, all those people. What you get from our business is creating something that didn't exist. And you're entertaining people, that is our job. So we go through all this pain because at the end of the day, there is something that you've brought to the world. And I was in Asia with my husband, and I was in this backpackers in the middle of Cambodia somewhere. And the first film that I made was on the shelf. I thought, wow. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And people watching it. I didn't say anything, obviously. But like, you go, okay, it's worth the pain. But in that alternative finance, it's really complicated. And it takes 20 odd years to get to that point of experience to be able to produce something that's commercially viable. Unfortunately, there's no quick road.
Wise words. Any other questions, or we've got to wrap up?
Yeah, we might wrap up.
Do you want me to do an outro?
You want to do
I'll do a quick outro.
You're good.
That's all right. Nobody can stop me from talking with my clients. So I really, I really want to impress upon people. I've been here for 20 years working in this industry for the same reason that Gina just said. The talent's here, the capabilities here, the access is here, and the runs on the board are sitting right in front of you. It's very important, and Gina's exactly right. We do this because we love the audience that we're trying to change. We are actually trying to make the world a slightly better place with everything we share. Knowing that you are connected to the product you make, and as you were saying before, have that leverage when you go into finance, very, very important, because it has to be yours. You have to care about it. Can't just be fee-for-service work. Can't necessarily be based on a grant either, because that's not repeatable. It's not sustainable. You lose connection with your audience. So I hope people take that lesson from here. I certainly hope that people reach out to us. I'm always available at Flinders to have a chin wag and buy a hamburger, which I'll probably be doing in about 20 minutes. And I really appreciate NBI for hosting this panel today. And I greatly appreciate this panel who had time is very precious. It's the most precious commodity to them for coming down here today. Yeah. Thanks, NBI. Thanks, Angela.
Pleasure. That was really valuable today, and I think I concur with a lot of the comments, and particularly you, Gina. You got to put money on the table, and that's what we do at NBI. We help you formulate your business so that it does create an income, but passion is a big part of that. There's no doubt about it. And what's interesting as well is that there's been a lot of pinging. We go from here, we go from here and there, and finding those opportunities. So connect with us at NBI. Like Dan says, we've got amazing people that can help you build your business, and something that's scalable and repeatable, of course. So we've got VegStorm, which is a flagship product that helps you refine your business model and help make and validate your idea, whatever that may be. So I also would like to, on behalf of NBI, thank you, the panelists, for your amazing time. I'd also like to invite our Acting Director, Verity, to provide some gifts for our speakers.
Very small. It's really
Chocolate.
very, very small. They're